Those of us who've been in video production for a long time know that learning to objectively understand the technical details of picture, sound, and signal, that is really kind of fundamental to achieving high-quality results. In part, it's because how a viewer perceives pictures and sound waves, your eyesight, your hearing as an individual, the environment in which you're watching or listening to something, having all those things have an impact on how the signal gets to you. That's variable. Each person's going to judge those things a little differently. So having a tool set that takes all that variability and gives you scientifically valid data that you can trust, that becomes seriously valuable. And that is eventually going to lead you in producing imagery to scopes, the tools that transform signals into quantifiable and measurable components. And that is our topic today. And we're thrilled to have with us as our second hour guest, the founder of Time and Pixels, Tomasz Huczek, who he's going to talk to us about his industry-leading product, Nobe OmniScope. Tomasz, great to have you here with us today.
Thanks for having me. Hello, everyone.
Well, it's great. I've been looking forward to this a long time because I remember when I got aware of scopes early in my career and the feeling of, I don't have to make pure judgments anymore. I can actually look at data about what are my video levels, what are my audio levels, what is the vector scope telling me about how my color is balanced or not balanced. It's really made things so much easier because you're not guessing as much anymore. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got excited and interested in this topic in the first part of your career?
Actually, the idea came organically based on the previous tool we developed in Time and Pixels. So our first sort of related tool was a false color plugin. It was a replica of the tool found in the video cameras, and we wanted to basically have the same tool in the grading suite. So we created false color plugin for DaVinci Resolve, so you would be able to basically create false color overlay directly in DaVinci Resolve. So you could compare the contrast ratios, signal levels as an overlay directly in Resolve, so you could have whatever you saw on set. If the colorist sat with DP in the grading room, the DP could check if the false color levels are whatever he wanted to see on set. So that was the first tool we created in Time and Pixels. And it's transitioned. We got a lot of feedback from the customers that they would love to see more features on top of that. And then the idea has been born. Okay, this is like the basic analytical tool. What can be improved? So then we added on top of that, and basically, long story short, that's how Nobe OmniScope came to be.
I have to tell you that learning about false color, particularly in terms of judging the values of faces in my shots, was completely transformative to me. The first monitor I got that let me go into false color and set where 70 or 80 IRE or whatever I wanted those faces to expose at suddenly meant that even if my monitor was messed up or was washed out by sunlight or whatever, to be able to see that part of the signal in false color is the color I want it to be, and that means my exposure is going to be good. And I would get back home and I would go, I shot this well. I didn't mess it up. I didn't change something because I couldn't see something. So it was huge for me. Are there trends that you see happening in these kind of tools and the way people use them these days?
Yeah, I think it's becoming more and more incorporated into the workflows. I think that a couple of years ago when we introduced false color plugin for DaVinci Resolve, many colorists were saying, it's on-set tool, not the post-production tool. But right now, I see that it's changing. More and more people use various plugins for creating overlays on top of the image, including false color, some sort of DCTLs for creating different types of false color, not only the RE based, but also saturation based, for example. So you could see the saturation levels displayed as false color. So for example, the grayscale would be low saturated areas, and green slightly saturated areas, and going into yellow reds when the saturation raises. So even in that aspect, but I think generally speaking, using scopes is more and more popular these days. And I see that even in the photography world, people start to notice the scopes and the importance of using those. So yeah, the customers of Time Pixels are from the colorists backgrounds, videographers, DITs, color scientists. So it's very widespread, and a lot of people transition into using scopes more and more.
I'm curious about this. You know, we're hearing more and more about HDR and extended color spaces and things like that. Is grading easier or harder than it was in those simpler NTSC, PAL, CCAM? If I get that right, it doesn't have all that much information. Now it seems like there's just way more information to manage. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I feel like it's way more difficult. All different specifications, delivery standards, quality control measures, different gamuts, different codecs for the compression ratios. So definitely more and more difficult, and tools like Nobe OmniScope can help you check your signals if they are correct and if they're what's expected on the other end. Yeah, but definitely the number of standards, different HDR standards, even you can get lost if you're transitioning from SDR world to HDR world nowadays.
Yeah, I've felt that a good little bit. I understand you have some slides to show us, kind of take us through a little bit of the OmniScope process. Do you want to do a little telling the audience what this is all about and how it works?
So OmniScope is basically a software suite of scopes. It's an application running on your computer, and the ideal setup is basically separate, usually mini computer running Nobe OmniScope, which is connected to your main setup using SDI or HDMI cable and some I/O interface. It features at the current moment 19 different scope types. It supports multi-input, so we can monitor more than one input at the same time. For example, for a live situation where we have multiple camera feeds. It supports HDR, of course, various standards, HDR, Dolby Vision. You can monitor SDR and HDR at the same time for Dolby Vision workflows. We support 12-bit signal. We also have advanced quality control tools. Recent addition to OmniScope is a QC timeline, where you can see all those QC features in the timeline, so you can go back and see where the QC event or problem happened. OmniScope supports NDI, so in the network situation where you have NDI streams, we can monitor that as well. We can also output NDI streams out of OmniScope if you'd like to send the signal or the scopes out for further transmission. We also support StreamDeck boards, so you can control OmniScope using predefined buttons. Because OmniScope is running on a separate machine, so it might not be easy to go from one keyboard mouse to the different one, or trying to control computer from remote machine. It might be easier to have the StreamDeck board and basically use the buttons to switch layouts, to switch parameters or settings on OmniScope. OmniScope features pretty much all the standard scopes, waveforms, vector scope, histograms, everything you can find.
Tomasz, are you sharing screen? Because we're not seeing anything. We're just still seeing the shot of you. It maybe didn't take out there.
Okay, but I wasn't sharing, but I can share as well.
You were explaining it perfectly well, so I was understanding and following you easily. But there we go. Now we've got your scope display up.
Mm-hmm. So on my screen you can see OmniScope running with some demo clip. So basically, here's the preview window. Here's the false color with the default preset. You can change the preset to some of the industry standard preset. For example, ARRI false color overlay. You can quickly change it from the menu. Here we have the vector scope, which is split into lows, mids, and highs, so you can monitor them separately. You can disable that and have just a generic vector scope. CIE plot, histogram on the right side here. This is not really interesting right now, so I'll disable that. That graph here, which is moving the playhead, is the QC timeline I mentioned before. So it's basically timeline which is generated on the fly, and it shows you QC events in real time. This is HDR statistics for max CLL, max fall. For example, the blanking detection, which detected blanking all the time and shows the red signal here. The audio waveform, loudness, and the thumbnails of the signal. So it's a very quick way to check all the QC events warning.
Yeah, and for those of you doing deliverables into broadcast or something where you have to meet standards, these kind of tools are your best friend in the world because you objectively know when you're into standard and when you're deviating from it. We have some questions starting to flow in. Let's just do a couple of them because I want to get the audience involved. So, Alexander, what do we got first for Tomas?
Our first question is from Nikhil Kamkolkar in New Jersey. What QC features does OmniScope offer for filmmakers creating distribution deliverables? Is it comparable to QScan at all?
QScan is dedicated QC tool. So it definitely has more features, and they are designed for QC specifically. OmniScope is not designed for the QC per se. It's analytical tool, and all the QC tools that we have in OmniScope, they are more or less like warning tools, just to give you an idea if the signal is correct or not. So I would say that we are slowly transitioning into more of a QC application in general, but we are not there yet. So we'll keep adding all those tools, and perhaps one day we could call OmniScope a QC tool like QScan. So I wouldn't compare them because they're different purpose applications. QScan is a dedicated tool to check your video files for the QC errors, and OmniScope is designed to monitor live signal and to give you an idea about the QC issues and potential problems.
Excellent. Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana is asking, mapping of false colors has no standard between camera manufacturers. Do you allow for these various gradient mappings in your software?
You can adjust it yourself. So if you go to the settings, it enters this like editing mode. And you can basically, using your mouse, adjust all your overlays. So you can map the gradients the way you want it. You can create new ranges. You can change colors. It's unlimited possibilities here to create your own.
Yeah, I remember I used to have things like when I got to 90 IRE, I wanted it to show bright yellow because I realized I was getting close to the top end of luminance values. And so every shooter will probably have their own, what they're comfortable with shooting this scene. So that makes a lot of sense to me that you allow people to set their own kind of display limits and what maps to which false color. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, exactly. You can set desired skin levels on your false color, and then you can quickly verify that all your shots, all your cameras match, basically.
There you go. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, could you use OmniScope as a live production scope to monitor the signal going out to the world?
Probably not right now, not yet, because the only, you could do that, but OmniScope doesn't allow you to send the signal out yet through SDI. The only option to send the signal out is through NDI. But if you route your signal yourself and only feed the signal to OmniScope for measurement, then absolutely yes. But it's not a switcher yet, so it's not possible to feed the signal into OmniScope and then signal out of OmniScope to somewhere else. We don't have this feature yet. We are working on it. So soon it will be possible to use SDA out of OmniScope. You could send the original input signal, or you can send the signal with some scopes on it, or you can apply some changes in OmniScope, like crop the signal, change the color space, or any different type of changes to the signal. But if you're doing the routing yourself and just using OmniScope as a verification on a feed or multiple feeds, then absolutely yes.
As somebody who's done a tiny bit of camera work, not a ton in multicam settings, I'm not sure. This is another distraction for me. So I wonder where in the chain, who needs this information? When they need it, and they need it exactly like you're describing. I need to be able to see every aspect of my signal and fix what I need to fix right now. But I'm not sure the whole crew needs to be watching that, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's circumstances where they were. Let's go on to the next question.
Next question's coming from me. Are there specific encoders that are supported for OmniScope or any UVC encoder? Could I use something like a Roland UVC-01 to convert HDMI to USB so I could use it with OmniScope on a dedicated computer?
No, we don't support this type of encoders. Not at this moment, unfortunately.
Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania asks, what has been the feedback from your customers that have incorporated into new features that you have incorporated?
Well, I would say that OmniScope is heavily community driven. We have our Discord channel, and probably 70% of the features are coming from our customers. We listen to our customers, and customers share their feedback quite a lot with us, and we do listen. I would say that all the QC features, the whole timeline, all of that came from the customers, as well as Twin Peaks scopes, the one you can see here. It's based on the diamond scope that you can find in all the hardware scopes from Tektronix, Leader, and similar. It's been long in the making, but introduction in OmniScope made a lot of customers very, very happy, especially the ones working in live situations, live events, and working with multiple camera sources. So I would say that's probably the most important one that was suggested by and required by the community using OmniScope.
You've been revving this a lot, and I guess you have new features in there that the market might entirely not be aware of yet. What's new and fresh and interesting in OmniScope?
Recent additions in OmniScope include vectorscope alerts, for example. So if you go to the settings of the vectorscope, you can enable this alert ring and max ring. So basically, a ring that can show you. I'm not sure, but it's not working for some reason. But
so you're drawing that ring inside the circular vectorscope display and kind of isolating that, and when invoked, if the way it's designed, will that blow up essentially that trace and let you look at it in more detailed fashion, or is it doing something else?
You are setting the maximum range of the saturation on the vectorscope. So basically, if you are setting the ring in this position, you are telling the vectorscope that you want your levels to be maximum at this level. So as soon as it goes out of this level, it will alert that the saturations level exceeded this ring.
Okay. So that's a limit. That's a tell me if you go over this limit. function.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a limiter of a saturation on the vector scope directly. But for some reason, it's not showing the alerts. I'm not sure. Maybe I chose the wrong version. I'll try to check it in a bit.
Yeah.
But there are a few more additions recently, which is focus peaking, for example. So that's the tool directly taken from the cameras. So you can, especially in the live situation, you can double check your focus and then make sure that the image is sharp where it needs to be. It displays the focus pretty much the same way you see in the cameras. You can change the peaking color. So it's pretty customizable, and you can also change the threshold to see more edges. And we also have zebras. So basically for IRE levels, if it's exceeding 100%, it will show this overlay.
Now that we're in so much dynamic range management, let me ask you this: we see trends in looks and color kind of approaches. One year everything's realistic. The next we're seeing a lot more pushed kind of HDR hyper realism. What do you? Are there trends here? And is OmniScope designed to keep up with all of that and give you various views, various feedbacks depending on what kind of color, not color space so much as maybe luminance space or HDR space you're working in?
Yeah, definitely. We have multiple HDR related tools. First of all, we do support PQ scale for the waveform, for the false color. So you can change that in the input settings. And if you do that, and I don't have the waveform, so if I go in here, I'll disable that. You can change the scale to be PQ.
Yeah, more headroom there.
Okay, and then it's going to 10K basically. You can do the same in the false color. You can also change it to PQ, and you can also change it to HDR mode. So it creates those overlays for you, where 1K to 10K is a different overlay. So it's sort of split between SDR range and HDR range. So it's easier to quickly see where your highlights in the HDR are and where the standard SDR range is directly in the overlay.
Hugely useful because so much content is shot in one form, but it's going to be watched in the other form, and somebody's going to have to do a transcode between what it was shot in and what it's going to be seen in. So knowing that ahead of time, I would think would be hugely useful.
Yeah. Also, I will just change it to, it's not HDR, but I will override the setting so OmniScope thinks that the signal is HDR. So it will not look correct, but just to show you another feature here. If we go to this one, if you are in Rec 2020, you can basically, in the CIE plot, you can check what pixels are out of P3. So if it's a P3 HDR in Rec 2020 container, you can quickly check if you are in P3 or not. So any pixels going out of P3 into Rec 2020, you will basically see them here in the CIE plot. You can also use the gamut check scope, and it displays it as sort of false color overlay. So you can see that those pixels are out of P3, so they will be highlighted in orange or red. Now in the CIE plot, you can see that there are no pixels or almost no pixels out of P3, but there are some here on the motorbike, and that's a lot of
fascinating.
Pixels. Yeah, so these are all HDR related tools that may help you be in in the correct color space, in the correct gamut. You can see that's a lot of pixels out of P3, and in this overlay you can see that majority of the image is basically red.
Let's go to our next question.
Next question is coming from Dave Trotman in Edmonton, Canada. Did I see a 3D color space in the list of displays?
3D color space.
Yeah, it's something that you might look at it like a 3D LUT ad or something like that. I'm guessing that's what he's talking about.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That there is a 3D color cube scope. Maybe it's about this. So it's like a 3D representation of the RGB. So the image is basically plotted in 3D along 3 color axes. It is a sort of like a 3D LUT representation, but it's only the colors that are here in the image. So it's probably the most useful when working on a color in a grading suite. But I would say it's also important to see that we are not exceeding the inner cube to keep the pixels in the gamut. So it might be also a gamut check too in a different 3D representation.
Let's go to the next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania asks, what is new with the latest version of OmniScope?
Well, we touched on some of that already. Is there anything else what are the other new things? What other features are you excited about in the new version?
One of those things could be global targets. We had them before, but we improved them quite a bit in this one. So if you go to view targets, you can basically create either RGB targets or Luma targets, and they will be displayed. So if you create luminosity target, again, I'm not sure why it's not showing up.
Well, it's because you're doing a live demo, obviously.
Yeah.
It would work fine if you were not doing
that. That's probably the reason. Okay, but I'll try to explain what it's for. If you create RGB targets, they're supposed to be visible directly in the vector scope. Maybe when I try to add a new vector scope, they'll show up, but they are not showing up. Well, I'm showing you the development version of OmniScope, so maybe that's another reason. Yeah, but basically the new addition was that you can toggle the targets with the keyboard shortcuts or with the StreamDeck buttons. So if you're looking at your targets, you can create the groups of targets. If you're working with advertisement, for example, you might have a specific brand colors. Your product might be of a specific green color with specific RGB values. So you can quickly add it here as RGB target. You will have a rectangle in the vector scope, so you can always nail your colors. And then you can create multiple of those for, I don't know, different projects, for different brands. And you can quickly toggle on and off to be able to switch between them. So you don't have to create new target for new projects, delete them, create a new one, but you can build your collection of your color targets and then quickly toggle between them and be ready to
that's mission critical in professional work. I remember hearing somebody, no, that's not Tiffany blue, and that is a thing, and it's been branded, and it's mission critical every time you work with that brand. So they don't want boxes to look anything other than absolutely perfect. And most major organizations doing marketing are every bit as specific as Tiffany is about. These are our colors. The red for the Coke logo must be the right red. And so I can see these being incredibly useful.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the features that those heavily requested by our customers. So it was really important for them.
Yeah, Well, they're spending sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars promoting their brand, and without consistency, that dilutes the brand, and they're not going to accept that, period. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, when monitoring an NDI signal with OmniScope, wouldn't it not be as accurate as monitoring an SDI signal because of the compression?
What do you experience?
Yeah, that's true, because NDI automatically adjusts to the network bandwidth, basically. So even if we are sending the higher possible quality of the signal, which is 16-bit in NDI, if the network bandwidth is low, then it might automatically switch to 8-bit 420. So basically, we don't have control over that. And if the network is not the best, it can degrade pretty much to 8-bit 420, which is pretty low quality.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there is no way to force it in NDI, because the priority for NDI is not to lose frames, so to deliver whatever quality they can. So they will basically degrade the quality of the frame instead of introduce latency and drop frames.
Got it. Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana asks, are there any false color mapping presets built in? Can I export my mapping choices to another system so that post and field are using same gradients?
Yeah, there are multiple presets right now for red cameras, for Flanders, for small HD, 2 different ones for the small HD. There is ARRI preset, there is Atmos, 2 of them actually, the Blackmagic one from the Video Assist, the Zakuto one, and the video devices, also two of them. And the way you can export it, we allow export to the 3D LUT. So basically, you can create your own false color overlay, then you can export it to the 3D LUT, and with the 3D LUT, you can load it up in your on-set monitor. Most of them support 3D LUT false color overlay, so you can then import this LUT exported from OmniScope, and it should work, and it should show you the exact same false color overlay.
Next question.
Nikhil Kamkolkar in New Jersey asked, to clarify, you do not run OmniScope on the same computer running Resolve, correct? It has to be on a different computer. Does that mean it's always working off a Rec 709 signal coming over SDI or HDMI?
It doesn't have to, but it's the recommended way of using OmniScope. You can still run it on the same machine, but it will use the same GPU. So OmniScope is heavily using the GPU of the system. All the processing and computation of the scopes is done on the GPU. So it will basically take your GPU resources away from Resolve, and Resolve will have less power to do its own processing. That's why it's recommended to do it on a separate machine, so your grading machine is not affected by OmniScope. But we have customers that use it this way on the same machine, and then it's still recommended to use the I/O cards, to still use the SDI or HDMI signal for monitoring, because there is a different way to use OpenFX plugin. So basically the connection between Resolve and OmniScope is software only, but there are multiple limitations, so we don't really recommend this way of monitoring. So even if you're running on the same machine, we still recommend SDI out of the same machine and back in to the same machine to monitor the signal. Yeah, and was there a second part of this question? I forgot.
Does it mean it's always working off of Rec 709 signals coming over SDI HDMI?
Yeah, if if you're using I/O card like Decklink or Ultra Studio, it will be Rec 709 or Rec 2020. So even if it's P3, for example, for HDR, it will come in Rec 2020 container. Yeah, if you're using the software only OpenFX plugin, then you can basically monitor your timeline color space. So if you're working in ACES, for example, or DaVinci Wide Gamut, you can still send this color space to OmniScope and monitor it directly in ACES or DaVinci Wide Gamut. But if you're using Decklink or Ultra Studio, you're left basically with Rec 709 or Rec 2020.
So when people are using it, how is it a standalone app? Is it a plugin? I think I saw on it's both available as both, depending on the system you're using and the NLE you're using and or color grading suite.
It is a standalone application, and we do provide plugins to connect with different NLEs. So there is a plugin for DaVinci Resolve. So if you're using this plugin in DaVinci Resolve, it connects to the standalone application through that plugin. We do have the same for Premiere Pro. For Assimilate Scratch, we also allow for some additional functionality like screen capture. If you would like to capture the image right in, for example, Photoshop or Lightroom, you can monitor also part of your screen while we're working on a still picture. Yeah, and on top of that, various devices and drivers for separate video cards like Decklink and Ultra Studio or AJA cards.
I think I was surprised when I saw that you manage color for still photography as well. That was I right about that? It's not just a video tool set, that there's a version for photos?
There is, yes. You can load up photos directly in OmniScope. Basically browse for files and open it directly in OmniScope. But you can also use this screen capture functionality to monitor pictures in real time. So you can open Photoshop, you can start working on your photo, and from OmniScope select that part of the screen where you have your photo, and you will be able to monitor that in real time. Unfortunately, this only works in sRGB right now, so there is no support for higher color spaces at the moment, but it's like at least there's some way of monitoring still photography.
Nice. Next question.
This one's for me. What are the ways you can get signal into OmniScope? I use an ATEM camera switcher, so how can I integrate it into my setup?
OmniScope directly implements Decklink and Ultra Studio devices, and it will auto-detect them and show you on the connect to list. But it also scans for the USB devices connected to your computer, and ATEM device will basically be displayed as USB device, and you will be able to select it as one of your inputs. So it would basically act the same way as any webcam device connected to the machine.
Great. Next question.
Josh Goffman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania asks, what is the best way to use charts with OmniScope? Which models do you recommend?
Charts? What kind of charts?
Oh, I think he's probably talking about the targets, the
chip charts, like,
chip
spider
charts,
checker, that kind of thing.
We don't support any specific charts or any functionality around that. So
I would imagine you can see, I mean, if this has scopes in it, you can probably see all the aspects of a chroma de monde chart or something like that. If somebody put them up and shot it and it's part of the video flow, there would be no reason OmniScope, with its vector scopes and RGB parades and the rest of that, couldn't deconstruct that and show that to you exactly whether your accuracy is 100% or not.
Yeah, exactly. We had some requests to include like a specific targets for specific charts to be able to see in the vector scope directly, and extra targets around all those all those values, but we haven't incorporated them yet. So you could probably create your own targets here in the targets window for all those colors that you have on your charts, and try to see if they align in the vector scope. But we don't have any specific functionality around that right now. Perhaps something for the future improvements.
There you go. User requests. Next question.
Yep.
Another one from me. What is the for a beginner, can you explain the basics of how the various scopes work? RGB parade versus vector versus histogram.
Yeah, let me just see if that, okay. Just checking if it works in this version. It works. So let me show you something. It was actually, it was a debugging tool for the development, but I noticed that it's actually a good demonstration tool. So there is a way to, I'm just trying to make it slightly slower, but basically there is a way to see how the waveform is constructed out of the signal, original signal. And there was a setting somewhere to make it, to make it slower. Okay, so in the waveform you can see how the source signal transition into the waveform.
Oh, that's great. That's lovely.
So you can see how high-level pixels here go higher in the waveform, and lower-level colors go to the bottom of it. And so this is RGB, so maybe the luminosity will go. So like
you're actually
this.
It's tossing you a 3D map essentially of the flat picture. That's a very cool effect. I think that for education, for helping people understand what scopes do, that's going to be fabulous.
It's like every pixel is being animated into the destination position in the waveform out of the source pixel, and the same for the vector scope. Maybe I'll zoom in a bit.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's maybe less intuitive, but at least you can see where specific hues go around the vector scope. But
it reminds me of tools like Mathematica that take, pure numbers in columns and turns it into something visual. So all the visual learners and the people who, it took me a long time when I was first learning scopes to understand the relationships of all these things. You can tell me, shoot color bars and make sure the dots are in the center of the targets, and then you'll be color accurate. But that doesn't explain much about how it's doing that, and why it's doing that. It's just telling me, do this function and you'll be fine. I think for everybody who's curious, the ability to see some of these implementations and see one view transformed to another, it's fascinating.
Yeah, I
Alexander,
thought that it would be nice to keep this feature in. So for anyone trying to investigate or try to see exactly where this spike is coming on from the picture, can enable this feature and track specific pixels from the waveform back to the pixel on the image. Yeah, so I thought it might be interesting to keep this in.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because now you can see in part where things like some tracking software get the data to do what they're doing, because there is an obvious different changing thing for an object that you're tracking, and the software can follow it. Alexander, you had a question inside this?
Yeah, first of all, that's a great demo, but I have a very specific question. So as someone who's not really a colorist, so for example, if I'm using my eyes, I'm looking at a scene, let's say there's an actor there, and I think that there's too much red tones in the skin. How would I read that waveform properly? If I pull up the waveform, what am I really looking for? How do I read that?
Well, for specific colors, would probably be best to use RGB parade, and then looking at the red levels. So if, for example, let me try to find something in the source. Okay, so you might be interested if there's too much red in the face here. So in OmniScope, you can make a selection here. And then you can see that the reds go in this range. Okay, it's in the PQ, but maybe let's change it to IRE. So then you can see that the levels of the red channel goes from 3 to 74. And then you can also use the color picker to see the exact RGB readings in the area. So you can specifically see what are the colors here.
So then you'd bring up your grading tools and essentially take reds and pull them down and watch how it changes the visual of that. And once you decide this is how I want it to look, you'll have a value that you can apply. Is that kind of the normal process?
Yeah, you can use the levels on RGB Parade as well as vector scope, because the vector scope tells you. You can see this is the skin tone line, so you can see that your skin tones are pretty much aligned with the skin tone line, so they are more or less the correct hue. But the vector scope tells you the saturation of those skin tones. So the higher it goes, the more saturated it is. So then you can also define your saturation range. That, for example, you don't want to exceed this ring on the vector scope. So then in your color grading tool, when you reduce the saturation or the red levels on the skin tone, you will see this going down, together with these levels on the waveform going down. So these would be like two primary tools that we would look at: the vector scope radius and the waveform height of the signal, basically.
Next question.
Next question is from Jason Bache in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Do you have an inexpensive, quick, and dirty USB-C capture card favorites for macOS? How cheap can I get and still get a reliable input?
Do you hear from your user base about what tools they use with this? And is there a capture card that's pretty well thought of in the lower range?
Well, there are many different ones, but I wouldn't really recommend them for signal monitoring. If you're using OmniScope, then you probably want to make sure that the signal, you want to monitor the signal in the highest quality possible, and all those USB capture cards usually give you compressed signal, and that means it's usually 8-bit with probably 4-to-0 sampling. So you're degrading your signal before it gets into OmniScope. So you're not really monitoring your live signal. So I would recommend using the higher quality cards, so you can monitor the signal as is, and it's as close quality as possible to original format from your camera or from your source.
Jason, you're here. You had a follow-up?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, and I understand the potential limitations here. That begs the question: how low can I go? You know, AJA UTAP, Studio Mini boxes. Is there anything in the USB-C like bandwidth realm? Price range $100, $200. Like, and if you don't know, it's fine. It's kind of outside, but you know, I just figured if you're monitoring forums, you might know.
AJA UTAP is probably the cheapest thing that will give you good quality. Yeah, and it's still USB. Doesn't require anything like Thunderbolt or anything more exotic. Yeah, so AJA UTAP is definitely on the recommended list of hardware.
There you go. Next question.
This one's for me. Is OmniScope just for video, or are there any related audio scopes?
We do have some basic audioscope right now. We have audiometer, the one you can see here, and we also have goniometer for the stereo mapping in left, right, middle. So that's it for now. We have many more on a to-do list. There is no dedicated loudness scope, but you can see it being calculated here in the real time. So the loudness you can basically see on the graph here for the momentary, short-term, and integrated compared to our 128 reference. But the dedicated loudness meter is in the making right now, so should be introduced in one of the upcoming updates.
There you go. Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. How have you seen colorists use a StreamDeck with OmniScope? What are their favorite parts to automate?
I think the most used feature using the StreamDeck is the ability to change the layouts. Because in OmniScope you can create different layouts and switch between them. So for example, you can quickly change between different layouts. And this change can be invoked by pressing a button on StreamDeck. And so you can predefine your layouts for different tasks, like you're working on SDR right now, you're switching to HDR trim, then you're looking for some QC issues, then you're focusing on your skin tones, and you might have different layouts for different purposes. So number one StreamDeck feature would be toggling between them. Then the second one is the option to basically turn particular scope into full screen. So it's called solo. So then you can define new action on your StreamDeck to turn particular scope into full screen mode. And by a press of a button, you can quickly go full screen on any of the scopes. So these two would be probably the most used StreamDeck shortcuts.
Tomas, Jason has a question.
Yeah, I mean, I figured we had another minute, so this may be a really dumb question, but when I go into plugins, I have this, OpenFX plugin is not installed. Is there any benefit to installing that on Apple Silicon Mac Mini? And what's the use case for OpenFX, if any?
It's an alternative to SDI connection if you don't have I/O card at the moment, or you want to test OmniScope without a dedicated hardware device. You can still use OpenFX plugin. We have some customers that could use SDI but still use OpenFX for some reasons. It's more convenient for them, or they prefer to use their I/O card for different purposes, and they don't want to use that port for OmniScope, and they are fine with OpenFX. But you need to know that there are limitations. If, for example, you cannot use caching in DaVinci Resolve. If you're fine with that, perfect, but many people need to use caching to keep up with the performance of the machine. So then you will have problems with OpenFX and OmniScope. Using different color spaces in Resolve might also influence how you see the signals in OmniScope. Then the configuration might be a bit more tricky because you are monitoring your color space of your timeline, not the output color space, and so on and so on. So if you don't want to have troubles, use DeckLink or Just Studio. That's the most straightforward way of using OmniScope. But OpenFX is an option. It's not number one on our list, but in some situations it might be useful.
For the people who have been watching this who are interested in getting a little bit of time on with it, what are the costs and how does somebody get a hold of it?
The best way is to download the trial version of OmniScope from our website. There is like 14-day trial. It works for 2 weeks with no restrictions in full pro version mode. and I think that's enough time to play with it, to trial the features and see for yourself how it works. And then you have basically two options: to grab a video version or the pro version. Video version is 225 euros. Pro version for $379 or $399, and it's perpetual license with 1 year of updates and priority support. After that, you can continue using your version without paying extra, and if you'd like to purchase extra updates for another year, there's like $99 per year for the updates and priority support. But it's not mandatory, only whenever you need a newer version or the updates.
Nice. That's a well thought out model. Also, you have a blog. How do people who want to learn more about color grading and learn more about that, can you direct us to the blog and any other sources that you think people would be useful?
Yeah, we recently started interviewing our customers, and that's what we have currently on our blog. You can have a look. We have very nice user stories on our blog from colorists, DITs, trainers, DaVinci Resolve trainers, with very nice stories and use cases for OmniScope. So only by reading that you can learn how professionals in the field use OmniScope, what are their takes on it, what are the workflows and their settings. So we learned from that. So I think many potential customers or people thinking about OmniScope might see it in action and read how they're being used in the field.
Thank you so much for stopping by and helping us understand Nobe OmniScope. I know people are really fascinated with color. It is such, for somebody getting into the business, this is magic almost. And I know I've watched colorists work and it's like, what are they doing? And how come it looks so much better after they're done doing it than it ever looked when I shot it? And so I'm really a great fan of the tools for this industry. And I think people who don't explore them, if you want a long career in the video arts, you really should pay some attention to these kind of tools because they're mission critical to get high quality work out as you go. Also, thanks to all of our producers, the people who ask the questions during the course of the whole show. We can't do this without you. For our panelists, everybody who volunteer their time to come in every day and answer questions from all over the world, and our incredible back-end crew who are sitting there in seats all around the planet every day, joining together to help everybody who watches Office Hours or listens to Office Hours in its audio feeds understand more about the technology that is changing our lives. Very quickly, the Trelec Traversal for today, we have, if you had to go around and get to the people who answered your questions or posed the questions and enabled this entire conversation, you would have traveled 72,000 miles today. That's 116,000 kilometers and 571 million bananas for scale. We're about to roll the credits. Pay attention to who puts the show together, and then we'll see you all tomorrow. Tomas, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Truly, I love this product. These hardware scopes, gone. Like 100% for anyone who's thinking like, oh, that's too expensive. No, it's not. It's better than the hardware. Trust me.
Well, what is it worth to know that your files that you're sending out, that is part of your reputation, are 100% the way you want them to be? And I know there are a variety of tools, and not everybody needs the sophistication and precision of something like this. But boy, once you learn it and you know it, it solves unbelievable numbers of products. And just that confidence to know that the work you're sending out is right.
Well, yeah, and it's that backwards, if you don't understand video and, what is mid-tone contrast and, mid-grade saturation, if you learn scopes, you can learn